The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. For most professional athletes, versatility means they can play a few different positions in a single sport. For Babe Dietrichson-Zaharias, versatility means dominance across the entire spectrum of sport. In the 1932 Summer Games in Los Angeles, Zaharias won gold in the 80-meter hurdles and the javelin throw, plus she got a silver in the high jump. Running, throwing, jumping wasn't enough for Babe, so she became a competitive billiards player, then jumped into professional golf, winning 10 major championships, all the while making a few pitching appearances in Major League Baseball spring training games. Mass Mutual understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Athletic.
Hello and welcome to the Race IndyCar Podcast. We're back. We're sorry for missing our post Road America episode, but we're going to make up for that in this action-packed episode of the Race IndyCar Podcast. Thanks for joining us. We've got a lot to get through on this week's show. We've got some massive IndyCar news stories that have broken during our time away, and we've also got Road America to get into. And yeah, we've got some interviews on this week's show to make up for missing our last episode. So coming up on the show, we've got IndyCar's latest pole sitter, Linus Lundqvist, and we've also got David Malukas, who surprisingly is back in the series already after being released by McLaren in May. He's now back with Meyer Shank Racing. He had a test last week and is getting ready for Laguna Seca. So he joined us to talk a little bit about his preparation for Laguna Seca and about that test last week as well. We spoke to him after it, so get some great insight into that test. But first of all, covering the Road America race for the race was Matt Beer, filling in for me and providing a much needed upgrade on the race's IndyCar coverage. So without further ado, we'll head over to him. We'll have a quick chat with Matt Beer, who's going to break down Road America with us, and then we'll get into some more of the IndyCar news stories and into our interviews. So sit back and relax and enjoy. All right, Matt Beer, we waited a long time to get you on the Race IndyCar Podcast, and now we've got you twice in the space of about a month. So thanks for coming back and joining us. Your hair's a bit shorter than JR Hildebrand, but I'm sure you're going to provide just as much fantastic insight as he usually does. You were on hand covering Road America for us this weekend. What was your kind of general takeaways from the event?
Well, first of all, if I let my hair grow as long as JR's, mine just goes upwards into a massive bushy fro. So it's I end up in a sort of Santino Ferrucci did that for a little bit, didn't he? Or a little variation on it. So that's if I dyed it blonde, I could be a bit Ferrucci. But yeah, back to the actual topic. Road America has always been my absolute favourite IndyCar circuit. Well, Cleveland, possibly back in the day. So when you said you needed some cover to keep an eye on that one, I was like, yes, definitely, as it's Road America. So my favourite 90s kart memories are from there. Like the day I got my GCSE exam results here in the UK when I was 16, rather than celebrating with friends, I went back and watched the 1996 Road America IndyCar race again because it was just too epic not to. So yeah, it's a place I'm very fond of, and it's a circuit where so often it ends up being yellow early on because it is just so challenging, and then it just gets going, and it's a pure flat out race from there. And it was much the same this weekend. So yeah, definitely enjoyed myself. I felt like I got to see quite a significant race for how the championship battle might go as well, with who won it in the end and what happened along the way.
Yeah, Matt, give us a little bit of a flavour of what happened over the weekend then for people who maybe haven't had a chance to catch up yet or haven't tuned into that race. Just give us a little bit of an overview of what happened in qualifying and the race just generally, and then we'll dig into it a little bit deeper in some more detail. No,
absolutely. So the two main factors of the weekend: wet, dry conditions, and Penske 1, 2, 3 sweep on the podium, but probably not in the order you might have expected at the start of the race. Saturday was wet, very wet in practice. Qualifying was wet, then drying. Ganassi called it best, got all 5 of its cars through to the fast 12 and had a breakthrough pole sitter in Linus Lundqvist, who was ahead of Colton Herta, who was probably going to be on pole if there hadn't been a red flag for an absolutely enormous Joseph Newgarden shunt. He put a wheel on a damp patch at the kink, which, if you know Road America well, is about as scary a place as you have an already very scary track. And he felt it was the second biggest crash of his career after his enormous Texas oval shunt, where he broke his collarbone a few years back. The sound Newgarden's car made when it hit the wall, even through a TV screen, was just absolutely sickening. It was amazing to see him walk away. And for much of the race next day, it looked like he would turn that in, to come back from that performance and take victory in his backup car, in one of those kind of bits of Joseph Newgarden heroics that he turns out so often. He moved to the front quite quickly in the race and looked to be in control until his teammate Will Power emerged on top in the final pit stops. But before we get to that, so I've followed IndyCar through the season, but in nowhere near as much detail as you have, Jack. And seeing Linus Lundqvist get on pole, I was like, this guy's doing so many hero to zero or zero to hero adventures, because obviously he wins the lights title, then has no drive, then the drive he gets is a Ganassi drive, literally an Alex Palou sponsor livery from most of last year. And then I've not had much of a read on how he's done so far this season. He gets this pole in wet, dry conditions at Road America of all places, and then gets rammed out of the race effectively at the first corner by his teammate Marcus Armstrong. So back from hero to zero again, but through no fault of his own. But would that pole have seemed out of the blue to you if you'd been working that day, or has Lundqvist been heading towards a performance like that?
I think definitely out of the blue, in the sense that to score a pole in IndyCar, I think everyone knows who listens to the pod, and you know yourself how difficult it is to secure a pole given how competitive the qualifying sessions are and the way they're kind of structured with the first 2 groups and then the top 12 and then the fast 6, and having to not just deliver all those laps at the key moments, but also manage the tyres in a way that gives you a set that is usable, because however you go about the fast 6, you're going to be using a set of used tyres. So managing the tyres through the weekend and making sure you've got something to work with in the fast 6 is difficult enough as it is. So yeah, I definitely would have been surprised by that, but it has been a really interesting kind of the kind of way you laid it out is kind of how his season's gone, really, in terms of some really nice peaks, but some pretty low lows as well, in the sense of being taken out by Romain Grosjean at St. Pete. They didn't get enough fuel in the car at the Indy GP race, which messed that race up. He was taken out in the 500 at the first lap, although he had crashed and put himself in a bad position in qualifying, which some Ganassi drivers have been able to come back from. I'm thinking of different drivers over the years, but sometimes poor qualifying performances you can obviously turn around in the 500, but he didn't get that chance. He was taken out at the first corner. He was also taken out in a shunt at Detroit as well, but also has that podium from earlier in the year. So we'll talk to him a little bit later in the show, and it's going to be fascinating to hear how he kind of feels his season has played out, but definitely an interesting one. And I wasn't expecting him to be on pole, and kind of interesting that he did take the pole when Colton looked so supreme in how he'd gone about his weekend up to that point, and just how good he looked in the wet. Matt, give us a little bit of I mean, for someone who's kind of dipping in, obviously you cover IndyCar a lot and you read a lot of my copy and you're obviously following the races, but maybe, I mean, when was the last time you worked a wet IndyCar race? Probably a little while ago. And to see Colton ahead to that extent, you know, at some points he was like 2 seconds a lap quicker than some other people. So what did you kind of make of his performance in the wet? It's kind of that time where you get a real sense of how good a driver is in motorsport generally. But yeah, Colton definitely looked like he was a class ahead of the field at some points.
By a crazy margin as well. And I know that the most impressive part of it was in practice on Saturday morning, but also in the early stages of qualifying. It's one thing to be quicker than everyone else in the wet. It's another thing to be quicker than everyone else in the wet Road America. Okay, maybe he was pushing harder at times than others were at those times, but that's his spirit anyway. I'm not always absolutely convinced by Herta. I wasn't convinced. I haven't been convinced by him being linked to Formula One as strongly as he has been. I've often been disappointed by how he can lose his head in races at times, and his execution seems all over the place. But how much of that is him versus the team is a whole different debate. But the thing you can't doubt with Herta is there's this enormous raw talent in there, and whether it can ever be fully maximized, I don't know if that's down to him or the environment, but watching him, the confidence with which he was throwing the car around Road America in the wet was just glorious. It's one of those things that reminds you why you love motorsport. But it also reminded me of how often I thought that about Jean Alesi in 1990s F1, when he would do something in slicks and on slicks in the wet, or just in a wet race generally, and he never got it all together in a sustainable way. And I just worry about that a little bit for Colton. I thought his race drive was great, considering he got taken out by Newgarden at the start. Colton was very angry towards Newgarden about this and felt Newgarden should have been penalised, because Armstrong was penalised for hitting Lundqvist, and Colton's argument was that Newgarden should have exactly the same penalty for hitting him in the same way. To that, I'd add Newgarden did hit Colton while they were both trying to avoid what was going on right ahead of them. Herta's argument was that Newgarden should have seen it and checked up more. When the two people at the front of the race are hitting each other and spinning in front of the pack coming out of a fast corner, I think you have to let everyone behind have the benefit of the doubt in terms of whether they bump into each other or not. Yeah. So I thought he was but you can understand his frustration. He drove a great race to come from last via a clash with Lundqvist on the way, on an alternate strategy to come through to sixth, and he just kept being off sequence on pit stops, having to really hammer in fast laps and then making his stops and then merging another few steps up the field. So it's a really good race performance too. It wasn't his fault that all his speed in the wet didn't turn into a race victory as well, but it's Colton Herta and it's Andretti. So, okay, on this occasion, it was a Newgarden red flag in qualifying, and then it was being hit by Newgarden. It was double Newgarden, being hit by Newgarden at the start that made a mess of it for him. But would Colton have found a way to make a mess of it himself if the race had been straightforward? You can never rule that out, and that's the frustrating thing about watching his progress, because the talent doesn't translate to enough results, and it just feels like that's been the case, particularly in the last few rounds as well.
Frustration, I think, is the right word, the one that you used, because he'd obviously led the championship going into the month of May, and his race kind of fell apart at the Indy Road Course when he was taken out by Marcus Ericsson in that race. And then the 500, he had one of the best cars all the way through the month in terms of expecting race, the actual race car itself, let's say. He was expected to have one of the best race cars, and even though he hadn't qualified in the top 10, he was still close enough that he would be able to look like he could move forward. And he made a mistake and crashed on pole in Detroit, and then the race fell apart there when it rained and strategy started going all over the place, and then he threw himself off in a bit of a silly crash, really. You're right to point these things out, and it is interesting to juxtapose how much this is Colton versus his team sometimes, because his team has made mistakes over the past few years and haven't always put him in the right position to maximize his qualifying performances or his race performances even. But I definitely feel like we're at some sort of crossroads now where I think everyone appreciates how fast Colton is, and I feel like it's probably a similar crossroads we've seen with other drivers over the years who've had that prodigious pace where they can pull out these kind of performances that you just can't explain because they're so good, but then he'll throw himself off in a bit of a silly accident after something's not quite gone his way. And it feels like the maturity maybe isn't always there, and the ability to kind of recompose himself and then just get back on with things in the way that some of the other kind of main championship contenders in IndyCar do so often. And I feel like maybe there was you'll probably know better even than me, Matt, on this, but I feel like it was probably a similar question asked of Will Power earlier in his career. And it's kind of interesting that he was the one who came out on top of this race, having delivered a bit of a 2022 performance in the sense that his season's been quiet, but he's just always been kind of lurking around. And as soon as this opportunity came and he got an even a sniff of this win, he was able to deliver it. I'm really interested in how you kind of portrayed the winner not being the kind of one that you maybe expect of those three Penske drivers. But this was a win on merit, wasn't it, Matt?
Oh, absolutely. This was so impressive. And my take on Power is often a bit maybe skeptical. You talk about his early days being a bit like Herta's. The big thing with Power was not getting titles won. He was the absolute fastest man in IndyCar for so long, but something would always happen to stop him turning that into a championship. But he'd still be racking up the poles, so many poles and wins. And then you've got this different version of Power later in his career where he is a bit more stealthy. But the big thing in the Road America race was the fears over how long the red tyres would last on the resurfaced track, and there were really dire predictions after practice of how quickly they'd fall apart, and people were keen to get rid of them early on. Newgarden seemed like he had set himself up for victory because he kept his tyres alive so well in the first stint on reds when everyone else around him was on blacks, and you thought, okay, he's got the fragile tyre out of the way. There were suggestions that maybe so many yellows early on helped him in terms of the heat cycles going through the tyres, made him get a bit more life out of them, and that if others were having to go too hard too soon on them later in the race, they'd be screwed. They'd have to pit very early. The fact that Scott Dixon, of all people, managed about half a dozen laps before his fell apart was kind of more evidence of how hard the red tyres were to keep alive. Scott McLaughlin fared okay, but it was heading towards the narrative that you thought from the start. Once Newgarden hung in there on reds and you knew everyone around him had reds to use as well, you thought, he's got this, he's on a better tyre for the rest of the race. And then the way Power kept his tyres alive so that he could do some very strong pace late in his stint, still on reds, and come out from his final pit stop having jumped McLaughlin and Newgarden was supremely impressive. So intelligent, such good tyre management, and such good raw pace as well. And then Newgarden came back at him, but couldn't get a move down, hit the limiter when he looked like he'd lined up his best chance. And then Power just edged away. And I'm a massive fan and admirer of Newgarden. I just think he's the all-round... Well, you had to put Palou in there these days as well, but to me, him and Palou are such strong, all-round, great racers, fast qualifiers, proper potential IndyCar greats for many years. McLaughlin, I think, has done an incredible job with his background to be this good in IndyCar so soon. And Power, relatively, feels like he's been there for decades now, is closer to the end of his career than the start, which I don't say as an insult, but like a chronological fact.
Yeah.
And he can pull something out like that. Now, I think Penske has too often held on to a driver too long just for like legacy loyalty reasons. Not a lot of NASCAR teams I think are guilty of that as well. And there's definitely times Penske should have jettisoned someone who'd won some championships or a 500 for it, but was past their best. And there were definitely points earlier in the decade when you might think that about Will Power. But then he pulls out performances like he did to win the title 2 years ago, and he pulls out a performance like he did to win Road America when really you would have expected either of his teammates to do it, and you just think, no, there's still so much ability there. And his attitudes, this is a guy who is capable of moments of temper, but these days, with what him and his family have been through lately, with how his career's gone, he often sounds so zen about stuff. He just, after the race, I think one of his first interview comments was about how you can't really be unhappy if your job is racing IndyCars. If you're with the team he's with and you're in the privileged position he is, there's nothing to really be too grumpy about for too long in your day job. So just enjoy it. And you'd think that might make him less committed, but it doesn't. He could still do something like he did at Road America, and it puts him in the lead of the championship. And to me, this feels very much suddenly like 2022 when he got that win in Detroit and then never really let the championship control or championship contention slip from there. I can seriously see the same thing happening again this year.
Yeah. He made such a tiny error in Detroit qualifying the weekend before and was banging on the pit wall with such ferocity that I was worried about his wrists and his hands that he was going to be able to race the next day. And you just kind of see the the level of determination is really still there with him, even though he's quite a softly spoken person in interviews and stuff like that, and generally talks quite slowly and is quite, you can see that he's thinking about what he wants to say, and that he doesn't necessarily display all of that emotion and ferocity in terms of how he talks, but in terms of how he acts and how he drives, the motivation for him to win is still very much there. And this is just another installment of the complicated career of Will Power and trying to analyse, is he one of the best IndyCar drivers ever? I think as, analysing his qualifying and his pole position record says that he has to be. But there's just been so many roller coaster up and downs over the years that it makes it difficult to kind of position him and wonder how well he's actually performing. And last year was the perfect example of that, of, worrying about his wife's health and whether she was going to make it through her health battles. He spoke about that after the Road America race there. And, to go from 2022, which was, so well advertised as a year where he'd completely reset his mental state and had found a way to be much more zen about how he goes about his racing, for then 2023 to be so disappointing, was kind of a fuel for the people who don't rate Power as much and feel like he wasn't capable of repeating those championship winning performances and those brilliant seasons over and over again. But we're starting to see a very, very 2022 year from Will Power this season. I'm glad you got to witness that via your coverage of Road America, Matt. Is there anyone we've kind of, there's lots of people we've left out because we haven't really got time to talk about the whole grid, but was there any other stories or people who jumped out to you over the weekend that you wanted to mention?
Before we move on, I just on your point about Power's season last season and what he said about it from in the Road America, he used a phrase along the lines of he had like one part of his head was always at home last season with his wife's illness. And I just thought, I admire that so much. I want these people to be humans, and ultimately what they do, what we write and talk about, throwing cars or bikes around the racetrack, isn't really that important in the scheme of life, really. And for Power to be up front and go, yeah, my wife was very seriously ill, it took my mind off racing. Like, good, absolutely, so it should. Drivers who miss the birth of their child to go and finish 18th in a race, think about yourselves. Come on, what are you doing? So absolute fair play to Will Power for his performances being affected by his family situation last year, and for being up front and saying it. Massive admiration for that. Sorry, that's a massive tangent.
No, it's good.
In terms of other people who stuck out, it was an interesting race because the narrative at the front became pretty straightforward, and then in the back of the pack, it's a typical Road America early yellows race where a bunch of people go off sequence, top up with fuel, hope for later yellows, and only really Herta came through very well. Pato O'Ward had to go off the track, avoiding the mess at the first corner. I thought he came back well to 8th after that. I was surprised by how Dixon struggled with tyres. Palou did a very Palou thing, just not quite being Penske pace, but being 4th, still being there. Romain Grosjean's race really caught my eye as well, to come from I think he was 14th on the grid to 7th, with just a feisty little drive. And I was one of the people who thought the Junkos-Hollinger move might be too many fiery personalities in one place with not a lot to fight for, because it wasn't going to be a title fighting team. And actually, it's going all right. And with everything, all the situations surrounding Augustin Canapino during that week, and all the craziness surrounding that team, that was not an environment you necessarily expect the other car in the team to be churning out a very solid race result with a very calm race drive. But that's what, especially when that other driver is Romain Grosjean, someone who does have one or two emotions. But I thought that was one of his best races I've seen from him this year. Really, really solid. And he seemed really happy afterwards. And I thought his move to IndyCar would be about getting back to the front after not being in the front of F1. And it was that at Andretti for a while. But he's also just pleased to be racing in this series and being competitive in whatever way and having those battles. And much like Power seems just happy to be there and he's also winning, Grosjean seemed happy to be there and he's also doing pretty well for a team that really 7th is above where Junkos should be most of the time. So yeah, I enjoyed seeing that race from him.
It was the right selection of Grosjean moments where he did his crash in practice, even though that was particularly problematic for Junkos, who was trying to turn out a car for Nolan Siegel at the time on late notice, having not had any sort of preparation for that, trying to sort his seat out and all that kind of stuff. And then Grosjean goes and sticks it in the wall at turn 14. But I'm sure they'd much rather he did that in practice than in the race. So doing that in reverse order than some of the other races this season, which is extremely good news for Junkos. And you're right, Junkos has always been about being able to bag the top 5, the the sixes, sevenths, eighths, ninths, tenths when they can. And that's if Romain could find a way to do that just a little bit more often, because he's so often in position to do that. He's just not been able to put everything together, whether it's been the team, whether it's been him. It's been close on many occasions, and the same for Canapino actually this season. So disappointing to see how that's kind of trailed off, but he's still ahead of some very, very good drivers who have had very good results this season, and Linus Lundqvist being one of them, and we talked about how unlucky his season's been, but Romain's still ahead of quite a few very, very good drivers. So it'll be interesting to see how his second half of the season goes, especially after a difficult bedding in period at that team, which is also in a bit of a crisis at the moment. So we'll keep an eye on that storyline. Matt, thanks so much for A, stepping in and covering this race, and B, joining us on the podcast and giving us some great insight into what happened over the race weekend. And kind of tempted to just hand over. Do you want to swap jobs, or you can come and do IndyCar for a bit longer, or you kind of happy dipping in and out?
Yeah, you're not having my MotoGP podcast. I'm going back to where I should be. So, but I do.
We occasionally drop a MotoGP mention into this pod because JR loves MotoGP, and I obviously follow it through the race, and it's such a cool series with so much going on at the moment. So definitely recommend people go and listen to that with you and Val and Simon as well.
Cheers. Right. Oh, you've also messaged me today pointing out another race you might have to skip later in the season, so I will take that one up. So. Yeah, I think it's a classic kart venue again as well. So cheers for that. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Always nice to have Matt around. He definitely makes up for some of my lack of experience in terms of the history of IndyCar, and very, very knowledgeable across all periods of IndyCar racing, and provided some great insight into that Road America race. Before we move on, I felt like we should get into some news stories quickly. Over last weekend, we had some news break in with Alex Palou, some more court documents being released in that battle between him and McLaren. One of the items that emerged from that was Palou acknowledging a clause in his Ganassi contract which says that he can race in Formula One in 2025 with McLaren. Some interesting details coming out of those court papers. So if you're interested in that, you can head over to www.the-race.com and read a bit more of an in-depth feature about that news and what it potentially means. The latest in the court case, some outlines of when we could expect a hearing, and some more details like that. So definitely head over over and check that story out. We also have to mention the Agustin Canapino, Juncos Hollinger, McLaren situation. It kind of all broke after our Detroit episode, so we didn't really get a chance to get into it then. If you missed that whole thing, we had a crash between Teo Porcher and Agustin Canapino in the Detroit race. Consequently, afterwards, Teo Porcher was sent death threats. We've seen this happen before with incidents that Agustin Canapino has been involved with, where Argentinian fans have sent death threats to Callum Ilott on 2 separate occasions. And obviously a small group of people doing that again, unfortunately, to Teo Porcher. These were really serious threats. And yeah, we had a bit of a slow reaction, let's say, from IndyCar, who took a good 17 hours to put anything out. And when they did, it didn't come from their social media channels. It was just sent to the journalists that asked for it. We did have a statement between Juncos and McLaren, a joint statement, and that was topped up later in the week by McLaren announcing that they'd split with Juncos from their strategic partnership. So some serious implications to this whole thing there. Agustin Canapino put out a statement which wasn't well received in terms of his wording and what he said in that. I'm sure by now you've probably read that, but you can go back and check it out on his social media feed if you want to catch up. In that, he kind of says that he just ignores when he's threatened. He gets stuff like this on all the time, but just kind of ignores it, which is obviously not is not solving the problem, so to speak. So yeah, that statement was widely criticised, and then he was pulled out for the Road America race, and Nolan Siegel went into the car for that race, and Agustin Canapino has now put out a video and has basically clarified his position in the situation, and it's been announced that he will race in the car. After there was some strong rumours that he might be out, he will race in the car for the rest of the season. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop story of that story. You can check out some more details, again, on the-race.com of how that story's developed. Speaking of Nolan Siegel and just Alex Palou a little bit earlier on, they were both in action at Le Mans, where Alex Palou finished 7th, the only Cadillac racing car run by Chip Ganassi to finish. And Nolan Siegel actually won the LMP2 class, so congratulations to him. A good weekend and made it worth the run over from all the way over from Road America to make it. So that was interesting. Some other drivers also in action at Le Mans. You can go and check out the results. People like Romain Grosjean also in action, Callum Ilott, the likes of. So yeah, head over and check out how the Le Mans 24 hours got on. All right. That's 2 big news stories out the way. So let's kind of move on to maybe not a news story, but definitely some interesting developments from Road America. And that was that Linus Lundqvist, who's had the most roller coaster season, managed to take his first pole position in tricky conditions at Road America. It was raining a lot, mixed conditions, slicks, wet tyres, all sorts of interesting stuff going on in qualifying. And yeah, I thought we'd get Linus on the show just to talk more about his season, because when you look at it on a piece of paper, it does not look great in terms of the results, but he's obviously had the podium at Barber, and aside from that, a lot of results that don't look so good. But when you actually dig into his season, a lot of that's not his fault. There's a lot of things happening outside of his control, and I'm sure that's been a mental challenge for him as someone who's so used to fighting for championships and all the series he competes in. So without further ado, we'll head over and speak to Linus Lundqvist. All right, Linus Lundqvist, welcome back to the Race IndyCar Podcast. It's always fun to have you on, and I guess even more fun this time because we get to talk about you having a pole position in IndyCar. Has it sunk in yet, the feeling of that, or is it still taking some time to get used to?
Yeah, thank you for having me back. And like I said, exciting times, and getting your first pole is always special because it's your first one. And it came, dare I say, unexpected, because I think Saturdays have been one of my weak points so far this year. So I've been trying to kind of sit down and have a think about it and see what we can do to improve. And the month of May was rough. Detroit was chaotic, as Detroit always is. So this was the Road America weekend was a bit of a reset for me, honestly, just to kind of rebuild my confidence. So I was happy when we went through to the Fast 12. Even happier when we went through the Fast 6, and then the pole kind of came a little bit unexpected. Obviously, conditions were tough, so it was a good way to kind of bounce back from what's been a tough couple of races. I
guess it's kind of weird because we don't get so many wet races in IndyCar. We sometimes get wet practices, or occasionally, obviously, there is some rain, but it happens very infrequently. And you've been in you've been in America now since, I guess, 2020 and maybe a tiny bit before. So I guess there's always this kind of feeling of it's hard to know in IndyCar who's good in the wet or who the real stars are in the wet. It's kind of a weird thing because I guess a lot of people have probably never seen you even race in the wet in terms of the people who've, followed you in America. So was that something you felt like you were good at in karting and in your younger days? And is it one of those things that you feel like you're particularly good at?
I would say so. And I think a lot of it I owe to growing up in Sweden and obviously spending 2-3 years racing in the UK. I feel like back in those days, half of the races I did was in the wet. So, I almost have as much experience racing in the rain as I do in the dry. And I think that's, people that grow up outside of Scandinavia or outside of the UK don't really have that feeling. So obviously I'm excited every time I see it rains and I know I'm heading to a racetrack. But I think a lot of people feel that way too. And I will say there's some really fast guys out in IndyCar that you wouldn't expect to be good in the rain, but they always seem to find a way. But it was kind of good, and it was my first time properly in the rain and in an IndyCar as well. And obviously it was kind of interesting to see how it behaves with the tires and the track and everything. But I was pleasantly surprised, I must admit.
I guess it's kind of interesting in an IndyCar sense. We were talking about this earlier on the podcast about how IndyCar qualifying is it's just so much more difficult than even qualifying in other series. You've got this 2-group system where you have to get through that to get to the top 12, and then you're into the Fast 6. And if you have made it to the Fast 6, you have to make sure you've saved enough tyre, or even sometimes at some circuits you have to guess. Even Road America in the past, obviously not this time because it was wet, but sometimes you have to decide whether you go with the hard or the soft compound in the Fast 6 even at Road America. And there's all of these challenges involved in this qualifying, and then add into that the fact that the gaps are separated by like 0.008 or whatever. Sometimes it's crazy margins. So I guess it seems silly to ask you if it means even more because it's so difficult in qualifying, but I guess it just adds to the gratification that not only have you scored your first pole and your first IndyCar pole, but knowing how competitive the series is and knowing all those challenges that you have to face basically in order to reach that feat. It must feel even better in that sense than maybe it would have done in other championships.
No, 100%. Like you mentioned, I think IndyCar qualifying is extremely challenging. Just progression through the first round is not easy because there's usually more than 6 fast guys in each group. So usually that means you're going to have to knock out some of the big names to even progress to, the Fast 12. And then obviously if you want to progress to the Fast 6, then you really got to step up your game. And like you mentioned, usually the difference is, and that's the thing, when I say that we've struggled on Saturdays, it's not like we've lost half a second. We've missed out, a tenth and a half to 2 tenths. But that's put us, instead of progressing inside the top 6, it's put us like P8, P9, P10 in your group just by being 2 tenths up. And it just shows how competitive this series really is. But like you mentioned, when you do have a good result on a Saturday, like we had at Road America, obviously you take a lot of pleasure from it, knowing that it's not an easy feat. But obviously points are being handed out on Sunday, so we knew that we had a job to do there. And I know that, this was just one weekend, but we want to be able to reproduce this every weekend and being able to fight for, progressing to the Fast 6 and fighting for poles as often as we can. But obviously first one is special, so I'm going to enjoy it for a little bit and hopefully learn to improve even more going forward.
I guess it's been such a weird season for you. Looking at the results just doesn't tell any of the story really, apart from obviously you had the amazing podium in Barber. But if we just look back through the results, I mean, you were taken out at St. Pete by Romain Grosjean. I think you didn't get enough fuel in the car in the Indy GP race, obviously taken out the first corner on the first lap of the 500, and then I know you were involved at least one crash in Detroit. I'm not sure if it was more than that in the end in terms of how that one kind of played out, and then obviously the pole turning into a massive fight back for you in Road America as well. Has it been, how do you explain to like people listening how the season's been for you? Because if you look at the results, it looks like it's been a really difficult year for you. And I imagine mentally it's been quite tough to be having some of these flashes of brilliance and then not quite being able to put all that together on a piece of paper. But also at the same time, you're doing all of the things that you kind of need to be doing. And a lot of the things that have happened to you have been outside of your control. So have you found it a struggle, mentally this start to the season, or are you taking a lot of kind of, confidence and enjoyment out of the fact that a lot of the time you're putting yourself in the right position and you're doing the right things, and that eventually you have to hope things are going to come your way a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I said, when you just look at the results, it's not what we hoped or wanted it to be. At the same time, like you said, a lot of things that's kind of happened throughout the races has been kind of out of our control. I've done plenty of mistakes, and I'll do plenty more. But usually, our pace has always been good on Sundays and during the race, which has been a positive. Like I said, it's the Saturdays that I've had to, work on and trying to figure out a little bit. And hopefully we took a step here in Road America, and we can kind of build on that continuing. But it's also just, that's sometimes how it goes on seasons like this. And obviously I'm still a rookie, and I'm learning a lot of things. And I think that sometimes I put myself in a situation that I didn't have to be. And those are things just you're going to have to learn. The 500 was a big learning experience for me. We had our highs and lows throughout that month. But just how much toll it takes on you mentally and physically as well to be racing as much as you are in IndyCar. It's been a real eye-opener so far. But I think the most positive thing for me is that we are doing most things right. Obviously, we've done a couple of things wrong too, but I'm not overly worried about that. We just keep our head down, learn as much as we can. And I think as well, we have had better pace than what the results have shown. And I think that's a good thing. And there's still 10 races to go in the season. Like, it feels like we're at the end of the line here, but it's not even halfway, which is kind of incredible. So I think we're going to have a good couple of races here coming up for us. And like I said, we continue to build together. And, the target for me is just learn as much as we can. And hopefully we can, learn enough to be able to put up a fight for the championship going forward.
Yeah. It's annoying that the sixth at Thermal came with a non-championship race as well. So that's another one on the resume that doesn't really count or doesn't really add up to what you're hoping for as well.
Yeah, and as well, sixth was the first place that didn't get any additional prize money. Fifth was the last one, and then it was it doesn't matter if you were 6th or 27th, you got the same prize money. I was just like, well, okay. So it's like a double whammy.
Yeah, for sure. I guess building on from that, how are you kind of coping with the approach to the season? Because I know you came into the season saying that you wanted to fight for wins and you wanted to fight for the championship, and that's always going to be your goal. You're a competitive racing driver, but you in your junior career, you've been kind of fighting to win every championship you've been in, and you've known that if you didn't win the championship, sometimes you wouldn't be able to compete the following year without the prize money and the help that you needed, the sponsorship you needed, and stuff like that to continue to compete. And now it's obviously a different battle for you this year in terms of what you're trying to do and how you approach it. So I guess, has that been difficult to kind of balance the competitor in you, the one that wants to be fighting for the championship now, and then the driver who's having to accept that that's not a possibility at this exact moment in time, and that you have to keep working and battling against the kind of adversity that you've faced in order to get to where you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely there was a change in mindset where, like you said, or I think in expectation, where in everything that I've driven before, you kind of jump in and you fight for the championship straight away. And that's why I love racing. It's because you're able to be competitive and fight for wins and podiums, day out and night in, or whatever, every day it feels like. And then going into here, obviously that was still my hope and target. But I had a bigger learning curve in front of me than perhaps I expected. But I still believe that, we've, like you said, we had the podium at Barber, we got the pole here. Like when everything is right, we know that we're as fast as anybody. The question for us is just, okay, how are we able to reproduce that, every single weekend? And that's kind of what I have to work on. And the target is going to be for like next year, is to be able to put more of those weekends together. And that's kind of what my mindset is this year. It's like, okay, we're going to try to win as many races as we can, trying to get as many podiums as we can, but trying to figure out a recipe for being able to be consistent with it. And that's the thing that I love about IndyCar as well. It's like, once you figure something out, oh, well, then, we have the road courses, street courses, and ovals, which are completely different. So just because you figure out one thing does not mean that you figure out the other thing. And I feel like it's almost like an even split, like a third of the races are road, street, and ovals now. It almost feels like. So, you'll have to focus to both of them, or all three of them as much to be able to fight for a championship. And that's a challenge, I'll tell you. That's a big challenge, but I'm excited for it.
It's a bit annoying that the second half of the season, we've got Nashville where obviously the track has moved to the oval. We have no second IMS road course race. So Gateway is the only one that you did at the end of last year of the 3 races that we that you get to go back to for a second time. But I guess the next home is Laguna Seca, and obviously you have, I'm sure, fantastic memories from there. And it must be kind of really cool to go back and kind of complete the kind of circle there in terms of going back to Laguna Seca where you won the championship, having had to, battle to win your seat last year and to get on the grid for this year. To go back there must be some, some good memories and a nice way to kind of complete that circle when we head back there.
Absolutely. Laguna always has a special place in my heart for many reasons, but obviously winning the championship there will always be a very, very fond memory. I haven't been there since the repayment, so I'm kind of excited for that to see how that is. The same was here for Road America, honestly. I haven't been there since they repaid it, so it'll be slightly different. But then generally, Laguna, Monterey, that part of the country, it's usually a good time. So I'm excited for it. And honestly, I'm excited to kind of get the short oval experience going here as well. Obviously, I had Gateway last year, like you mentioned. But I know that the Iowa races are usually chaos and they are always so much fun to watch. Like they look amazing from the outside. So it's going to be interesting to kind of be in it and really see all the craziness.
Well, Linus, I'm sorry the season hasn't gone exactly as you planned, but there's definitely still some positives to look back on, and winning your first pole position has got to be pretty high on the old career resume. So well done for that. And I'm sure we'll catch up with you later in the season. But here's hoping for a little bit of a less eventful and more even second half of the season for you.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Jack. Appreciate that.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
All right, we were talking about various races that Linus won't get to do for a second time after making his 3 appearances in Meyer Shank last year. 2 of those races not running in the second half of this season, so a little bit tricky for him. But we do have some calendar news in IndyCar, which is interesting, and that was supported by the fact that the TV provider has changed now, starting in 2025, and it'll be Fox taking over from NBC. So I think there's still a lot to come from that in terms of working out how things are going to change in IndyCar and what we might learn from that whole thing. But the big takeaway is that all of the races will be on network television, which is a massive move for IndyCar, an unprecedented deal really when you consider the details of it. And yeah, I mean, it's clear from the races that IndyCar have had on network TV, the boost in ratings that they get compared to the ones that have not been on network TV, how important that move is. How streaming and stuff like that's going to work afterwards is something we'll keep an eye on and work out. It won't impact the international deals. So if you're listening to this from England or any other country for that matter, those deals are negotiated separately, so it shouldn't affect how those deals work out. So the big news with the calendar is that the Thermal Club will be a championship race this year instead of that heat race, non-points race that we had last year. So that'll be welcomed by basically everyone, I imagine. Also gives us 2 races in March, with that being on the 23rd. Elsewhere, we've also got Milwaukee dropping back to a single race instead of 2 races, as it is this year on its return. We've also got Nashville staying at the Super Speedway, which was widely expected. We've got Gateway moving to earlier in the year, in June. That's a significant issue because it clashes with Le Mans. So all of those drivers we were talking about earlier who are taking part at the Le Mans 24 Hours will struggle to do so without kind of dropping either Le Mans or Gateway because they're on the same weekend. And what else do we have? We still don't have an oval before the Indy 500 as the kind of pre-Indy 500 calendar stays pretty much the same. And we've got Laguna Seca moving back a tiny bit to the end of July as opposed to the end of June where it takes place this year. So that's kind of a rough outline of the calendar. You can also head to the-race.com, head to the IndyCar section in the drop down, and you'll be able to see a story about the calendar there and a bit more about the TV deals as well. So that should get you up to speed in that area. Other news that broke at a similar time was that David Malukas would be back in action at Laguna Seca. I'm sure you've got a lot of questions about this because he's obviously had his wrist injury. He was released by McLaren. We were expecting him to be out a little bit longer, to be honest. But as he'll tell you in this interview, he's kind of sped up his recovery period with his doctors, worked really, really hard when this opportunity at Meyer Shank became available after Tom Blomqvist was dropped after the Indy 500 for 2 races where Helio Castroneves took up the seat there at Meyer Shank where he's raced before. Now David will take over from Laguna Seca. He's just got one hurdle to clear before he's cleared to race in that event, and he'll explain that to you in a second. So let's hear from him. David Malukas, welcome back to the Race IndyCar podcast with some very good news that you've been back in a car recently. So thanks for joining us. And yeah, I guess life's got to be pretty good for you right now, even if it is complicated getting ready for your first race again.
Yeah, no, I'm super happy. Obviously, really good news. So I can wake up with a smile again. But there is obviously added a lot of work and more pressure to it. So this hand had a little bit of a break, and now it's back to just getting beat up on every day.
Did you wrap yourself in bubble wrap and cotton wool before your test to make sure you were going to be good to go?
Oh, dude, honestly, I felt like I was like been cursed. Like the few days before the test, I was like just being as careful as I can, driving under the speed limits, making sure that it's like we are going to be as safe as possible until I get into that seat, so nothing else happens to me.
Have someone walking around opening doors for you and stuff like that just to make sure you don't get any residual injuries.
Honestly, dude, like every little thing, like going upstairs, down the stairs, like I was doing it so like meticulously, like and left foot and right foot and left foot and like just really, really focused.
Well, tell us a little bit about the test. Obviously, I guess great to get back in the car. How did it feel? And I'm guessing there's, with days like that, there's a little bit of kind of making sure that you achieve the goals that the team wants to achieve, and that there's an element of being a super serious racing driver to it, but also a big achievement for you to kind of get back in the car and tick that off the list, I guess. So give us an idea of how you felt after that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, going into there's so many new things, from my side. How's the hand going to do? Is the performance still going to be there? It's been a lot of months off. Everybody else has been on it. New team, new people, new car. Just a lot of new things that were kind of unknown going into it, and obviously letting the mind overthink. So I couldn't wait to get into the car so I could finally just see what's what. And honestly, from immediately when it went off, I mean, other than the seat and everything still feeling, I'm like, man, it's the same seat, but everything for some reason it doesn't feel, I'm not really in there yet, So that took a little bit of time. But from the team side, it was really good. I mean, I love the team. Everybody's been super nice. The car is very quick. I mean, the performance was there as soon as we got into the car. I mean, it just took a few laps, and I felt like I was back in the rhythm of things. And the hand was perfectly fine. I mean, going into it, I wasn't really too worried on ovals. It was all of it just being left-handers. There's no pressure on that left hand. It's more obviously looking at Laguna, Mid-Ohio. Those are the ones that I'm more interested to see how the hand's going to do.
Yeah. Is the bumps and stuff at Milwaukee an issue with the hand, or do you not feel so much of that through the steering wheel?
No, I mean, all oval stuff is going to be pretty easy. Like Laguna, I mean, like the big one that I'm thinking is that last corner. It's going to be, it's obviously a lot of steering input on that left-hander, and you're also going over a bump. So that's the one that I'm more kind of like, okay, well, that's going to be the tall tale sign of how the hand's going to be doing. But for Milwaukee, it was very easy. Went through without a breeze, didn't feel anything. I mean, it was really good.
Do you have to do anything to kind of be ready to race next weekend? Is there any sort of of IndyCar cleared you to do all that, or is there still stuff you have to do to kind of show that you're ready to go?
Yeah, I think they're going to want me to go on a simulator and kind of set the force feedback and everything to IndyCar spec.
Yeah.
And then I think just do full race in 95 laps. So I think we're planning to do that. And I've obviously been on the sim pretty much every day. So I've already been able to do it. And I think, I think the clearance will happen no problem.
Yeah. I guess it's going to be in many ways a hard week having to do that, having to do these race distances and all the work that you've been putting into the wrist. I guess you're probably going to end up going into Laguna Seca with even more preparation than you would for a normal IndyCar race, just on the work that you have to do to get the hand, in a position where everyone's happy with it.
Yeah, exactly. There's been so much to do. I mean, this hand has so much work to be done. I mean, it's from the strength side, but then it's also stretching. I mean, it just turns into a 9 to 5 job. I mean, I wake up and it's just immediately get on this hand. Now I got to heat it. Now I got to do cold therapy. Now I got to do compression. Now we have to stretch it. Now I have to do strength. It's like, there's a lot to it. But it's at the end of the day, like, yes, can I race Laguna? Sure, I can do it, but we want to go in there and perform and make sure that the hand can continue to perform for that 2 hours plus.
I know you've spoken already about how much you've enjoyed working with the team. Give us a little bit of a flavour about how the whole thing came about, because I know when Tom's kind of situation was coming to the fore, there were people already talking about you and linking you to that seat and all that kind of stuff. Give us a flavour about how all that kind of stuff came about and how you ended up driving for Meyer Shank, because it kind of came very quickly.
I know, it happened so fast. They made it a little. I mean, I think people were figuring it out just because, I mean, Elio was like going to do the 2 races. So it just seemed like they're like, kind of, they connected the dots. But it was quickly after the 500. I mean, when the announcement came out, I mean, we got the call, and then we started talks, and I had to kind of hit up all the doctors and surgeons again and be like, hey, so actually, new timeline, can this hand be ready in 3 weeks? Like, what do you guys think? I need to get that clearance done, and worked with all the doctors. They were super amazing. Obviously with my trainer as well, Sean Smith, Trammell, Julia, Dr. Peck, Sarah Barton. I mean, all of them helped so much. And they all got the clearance, and they're like, yeah, you're good to go. Let's do it. So went with a new training plan leading up to now. And it all happened really fast. I think when we first initially started the talks to when we went pen on paper, I think in total was something like between 7 to 10 days. It was very, very fast. And
you're gonna have to spend the next off season working on the right hand, because you've done so much work on this left one. It's going to be 10 times stronger than the one on the right.
I hope so, man. But that's another thing too, is since the timeline is a little bit short and the left hand's still going to be a little bit on the weak side. I mean, I've also been doing a crap ton on the right hand to just obviously make sure that it can compensate for the left. So the average between the two is like right where you want it to be. So this right hand's also been getting a lot of pump in as well.
Yeah. Tell us about the hybrid. It's quite interesting that it's kind of getting its first proper go on the oval with everyone. And I know you did the test with McLaren earlier on, but this was the first chance to kind of get a proper taste of what it might look like next year or later in the year. Sorry. So give us a flavour of, just for the fans at home, like how it works and what you kind of felt the benefits of it are.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, they had the levels set at a pretty low recharge rate and deployment rate, but overall, I really enjoyed it on an oval. I was a little bit conflicted on how it's going to be when you're getting extra horsepower when somebody else is, possibly saving fuel on an oval. I feel like it might be a big drastic difference in speed and could create like kind of a bit of a problem. But at least from Milwaukee at this test, with it being such a high degradation track, it actually helped a lot with the racing. I mean, because of it's being so high deg, it's so hard to set people up and make passes. But if you can time the deployment, let's say they went on to the attack and then they couldn't get it done, and then that they're recharging, you can try to set them up for the next corner and you deploy out, and then you can kind of get it done. And then it's kind of like this domino effect. I feel like that's going to happen throughout the field, but at least somebody's going to get that move done. So I do think it will help on the racing side of things. And at that low recharge and deployment rate, it's not like a crazy jump. So overall, I thought it was very well, and we kind of went through the day without having any issues.
Can you explain like how it works from a driver's perspective, like in the cockpit, in terms of just like, so the car's going around the track, how is everything working in terms of what you're doing and what you have access to?
Yeah, so when it comes to the driver's side, the only change that you have is really you have 2 extra buttons now, and it's a regen and a deployment button, and you can choose when you want to regen the battery, and obviously it's going to be a little bit slower when you're regenning, and then when you want to deploy. And depending on how much deployment level there is, that's how much power you're going to get out. And there's also a energy limit per lap. So you can't just keep recharging, deploy, recharge, deploy. You have to obviously time it where you want to use that deployment because of that energy limit. And there's different ways that you can do it. I mean, I think it's all driver preference. If you want to have a button, if you want to maybe use one of the clutch paddles to regen, those can actually also be more of like a gradual too. And then there's also some different stuff from Honda's side that they're working on to try to make it better. But overall, yeah, it's very cool.
Sounds exciting, and it's a big opportunity to get this test in. And it was just fortunate, I guess, that the hand was ready to go for this test, because if you'd have missed this test, then I guess you probably would have felt a bit of a disadvantage. So it was great that you got that opportunity in.
It was huge because also at the end of the day, they did kind of like this race simulation deal which of course isn't like an actual race, but
yeah,
I mean, you tell drivers to go race, but not actually race. I mean, the drivers are going to kind of race. So there was a little bit of racing going on. So it was good for me too, to kind of just immediately get back into the swing of things and go back to getting into race scenarios, trying to set people up, saving tires, all that stuff. So it was honestly that test overall, although be it a short day, it was a good refresher to head into Laguna.
How has your relationship with Felix been so far? I mean, I'm yet to meet a person in motorsport that doesn't like Felix, so I'm sure you've settled in well with him. But yeah, it's I guess kind of an unusual full circle thing where you went in at McLaren after he'd left, and now you're kind of joining up together in one team. So kind of like a fun scenario for the two of you to be kind of joined together.
Yeah, no, it's honestly, it's a really cool group. The way it all kind of happened. And with Felix was actually the first driver to come to me when I first joined the IndyCar field, and he was the first one to say hello to me and introduce me, cool. and being super nice. So Felix is literally one of my favorite drivers out there. Also when it comes to just friends, he's an incredible dude, and to be teammates with him now, it's going to be awesome. And I'm excited to see what we can cook up.
Kind of annoying how well he's doing, I guess. You're going into a team where he's performing at such a high level. He's going to be a tough teammate to match the way he's going this year.
Yeah, but it'll be perfect for me. You know, at the end of the day, you know, this is just a really good opportunity for me to get back in the car and to get this hand and not really miss too much time outside of all the other drivers. But on top of it, I'm still 22. You know, there's still time for me to learn. I'd say I'm still on those. I have a few more years of my brain absorbing information before it starts caving out. And I have Felix's data, and of course with the Andretti Alliance, we get all the data from them. So overall, it's a really good opportunity and a really good place for me.
Yeah, for sure. I guess you're quite lucky in the sense that you've worked with Honda before as well. So it's probably not such a enormous transition for you, kind of just going back to that fold and kind of understanding how that group works and stuff as well. So I guess that's probably another positive of the move, that you have that experience already working with those guys.
For sure. And in that perspective, it's like I already have 2 years worth of data from Dale Coyne Racing with Honda. So all my pedal maps and the different things that I like that we've kind of come up with and perfected, it's all kind of back now. So that's another thing that's just really helpful jumping in mid-season, is we already have somewhere to start with from what I had previously.
Yeah. Was it quite tough in the test, just kind of trying to forget about the hand? I mean, I know you obviously feel like you're ready enough to do a race distance, and you've proven that with the simulator time you've done and all that kind of stuff off the track. But I mean, just from a personal point of view and just from a mental approach to a test, obviously it's a really important test for Meyer Shank. Like, they weren't just putting you in there to give you a few laps around an oval. Like, that was a serious test for the future, for the team to work on some stuff and to get used to the hybrid package. And I guess yourself, you know, you didn't want to go into that thinking about your hand and what it's doing. You just want to go in there and be a racing driver and get back to doing what you do best. So did it take any sort of time to kind of get used to that and kind of go back into that kind of mental mode, let's say, or was there a little bit of thinking about that?
Yeah, it was a little bit. I mean, definitely before getting into the seat was where, you know, I was thinking about the hand. I mean, also like early morning, the hand is a lot stiffer, you know, and I have to go through like a certain warm-up routine with heating and heating up all the ligaments, moving it, stretching it before I can get in the car. And with it, the session kind of starting pretty early with the driver's meeting on top of it, it was all, you know, a bit rushed. So I'm like obviously doing all this stuff to my hand to make sure that it's ready to go. But once I got in the seat, I mean, again, it is an oval, so it wasn't really much of an issue. But once we got in there and went out, I mean, you kind of forgot about the hand. The only time the hand was in thought was definitely going into pit lane, having to do all the wheel rotation back and forth from left to right really quickly was interesting, having to do more than a one full turn. So I had to come up with like a different kind of sequence with the two hands to try to get that down. So other than that, though, I mean, on track, though, the hand was out of thought.
Well, no, everyone's super happy to see you back in the grid. So we wish you all the best for Laguna. Hope all that goes well and the preparation's good. And we'll get you on a few races time and see how you're getting on. But for now, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, man. Thank you again.
It's always great fun speaking to David Malukas, and I really do believe that as a personality, he makes the IndyCar series a better place to be. He's a great young talent and a fantastic person to have around, really entertaining and a great character. So really good to see him back in full-time competition. Obviously not nice at the expense of Tom Blomqvist, but David has certainly had his own trials and tribulations and deserves another chance to come back and race in IndyCar. So it's going to be great to see how he gets on. I think Laguna Seca is going to be a really rough event for him in terms of how difficult it's going to be on that hand. Obviously, it's been resurfaced in the last couple of years. It's a really quick track, some difficult turns there, lefts and rights for his wrist. So it's going to be a really tough event, and it'll be a good kind of marker as to where he's at. If he's a little bit further down than where you might expect him normally to be, or a little bit further off Felix Rosenqvist than you might expect him to be, I would enter that with a little bit of caution, given that wrist and how little he's had in terms of preparation for this race. So it'll be very interesting to see how he gets on. I wanted to nod to Jamie Chadwick and go back and listen to an interview with her in our back catalogue from last season, but she's been slowly chipping away at the season this year, generally just moving up the order, and she's been taken out a couple of times in races, but been qualifying well and had quite a few things outside of her control really affect how she's got on. But she finally won at Road America. Everything went well that weekend, got the first pole, got the first win, massive achievement for Jamie. And I'm just really happy to see all of that hard work that she's put in paying off, because there's been a couple of times this year where she's been performing really, really well and just had things outside of her control just take little results away from her. And definitely think she would have been on the podium in a couple of races earlier in the year if things hadn't gone sideways. So great to see Jamie doing well. We'll hope to see her continuing that form through the rest of the season now, having that breakthrough win. So that'll be very interesting to watch as a storyline. I think we've pretty much caught you up in terms of all of the news stories that have broken in between Detroit and now coming up to Laguna Seca. Obviously, Laguna Seca coming up this weekend, and that'll be one where JR and I will be back afterwards to break down everything that happens. You might remember last year, Laguna Seca was a wild race, so we had all of those cautions. It was the last race of the season. It was a Scott Dixon win, his third of the last 4 races of the season last year. It'd be very interesting to see if he can repeat that feat. It'd probably depend on how wild the race is, because as we saw at Detroit, a very similar situation where there was a lot of cautions and a lot of strategy at play. Of course, the strategy master and fuel saving master Scott Dixon was able to come to the front, so it'll be interesting to see if he can do that again. Scott McLaughlin was the runner-up, having gone to the back at the start, and Alex Plow was on the podium, having won in 2022. So I think those 3 drivers are a good barometer of pace, strategy, racing sensibly, and just drivers to watch as we head into the Laguna Seca weekend. So apologies again, we're a little bit late coming back after Road America, but I hope we've made up for that with this bumper show, some great interviews and a really helpful look back at Road America with Matt Beer. So we'll look forward to having him back on later in the year, maybe at Milwaukee, when he's likely to cover another race for us then. So we'll look forward to that. In the meantime, enjoy Laguna Seca, and JR and I'll be back afterwards to break it down. That's all for this week's episode of the Race IndyCar Podcast.
The Athletic.